Our series is the Gospel According to, as we meet various people in the Gospel of John over 6 weeks together. And today we're thinking about the Gospel according to Caravaggio. God speaks to us by grace. It's so good, isn't it, that God doesn't just speak to us if we've got it all together. You may not know anything about Caravaggio, so let's just watch this clip together to remind us of who the painter was.
Caravaggio was born Michelangelo Merisi on September 29, 1571 in Milan, Italy. When he was only 5 years old, the bubonic plague ravaged Milan and his family fled to the town of Caravaggio. Michelangelo Merisi would later take this town's name as his own and be known professionally as Caravaggio. Even though they fled, the bubonic plague took Caravaggio's father within a year, and a short time later, his mother as well. Caravaggio was an orphan at 11 years old, but he was not completely alone. Simone Petrosano, a painter working in Milan, took him in as his apprentice for 4 years. The young Caravaggio also got involved with a street gang. The gang was comprised of painters and swordsmen. Their motto was, "Without hope, without fear." When he was 21, Caravaggio got into a brawl with a police officer and wounded him. Fearing the consequences, Caravaggio fled to Rome. Arriving in Rome like a stray dog, having no money, no clothes, nor food, he worked as a painter in factory-like conditions and was unable to find a job that fulfilled or satisfied him. After 4 years of this, Caravaggio was determined to make his own way. A local Catholic cardinal took to his work and became his patron, providing him with room and board. This set Caravaggio on a path of work for powerful patrons who would come to protect Caravaggio in his run-ins with the law. Caravaggio painted with intense realism, using direct sources of light that faded into darkness. People were shown just as the eyes see them, with all their natural flaws and defects. His biblical scenes showed a spiritualness and sensitivity, but they were also shrouded in darkness. Caravaggio himself was tormented by darkness. He was fond of drinking and gambling, and after working for weeks, he would set out for the streets, carrying a sword and looking for a fight. In 1606, one of Caravaggio's brawls left a man dead. His patrons would not protect him from this murder, so Caravaggio was again forced to flee. He ran and hid from place to place. Local citizens reported sightings of a strange man who loudly ridiculed painters and slept fully clothed with a dagger at his side. He was a nervous wreck, and his paintings depicted shadowy figures standing isolated in great empty backgrounds, revealing the desperate state of his mind. On July 18, 1610, Caravaggio's body was discovered. The cause of death remains shrouded in mystery. Caravaggio's temperament was notorious during this time and left him with many troubles. His art has stood the test of time, and the intensity of his work came to be a main source of influence to the great artists to come.
He actually died in a swampland of a fever. He'd escaped from a prison where he'd been put and was on the run. And 3 days after Caravaggio died, they received notice from the Pope that he'd been forgiven for the crimes he had committed. But he died in his late 30s, way too young. In that clip it said that he had a desperate state of his mind. And I realised as I was doing my initial notes for this that it was all over the place. You can see on the screen here were my initial notes for the talk. And they're going to come up there. You can see it was, and I realised actually this is all over the place because actually this guy Caravaggio, his life was all over the place. But his paintings were confrontationally lifelike. He was the first to paint people with dirt under their fingernails. If he had a model and she had a rip in her dress, he would paint that rip into the dress, whether it was a lowly figure he was painting or Mary, the mother of God, that he was painting. He didn't really care. But he didn't paint that much, only 80 canvases in his life. Compare that to Van Gogh, died at a similar age, 900 canvases and 1,100 pencil sketches. Van Gogh was ferocious in his output, one a day in his final year when he struggled with his mental well-being. Caravaggio seemed to be more on the run and scared of the people who were after him. He was also quite clever. In the beheading of John the Baptist, he put his signature not at the bottom of the painting, but in the blood of the beheading. You can see down there, and the blood just ekes out, and it's Caravaggio's signature. When he painted the Death of the Virgin, which is a painting about Mary, the mother of Jesus, you see here that Mary is being mourned by Mary Magdalene. The religious leaders did not like this. Simon Sharma, in his book The Power of Art, said he used the body, it was said, of a drowned prostitute from the brothel quarter fished out of the river Tiber. So beneath the red dress, Mary's body is crudely bloated, her skin is greenish. When the religious leaders saw this, they said, no, you paint Mary as an angelic figure, not in this way. Caravaggio had a way of painting himself into many of his paintings. The American preacher of the last century, Henry Ward Beecher, said, "Every artist dips his brush in his own soul and paints his own nature into his pictures." If he was writing now, he would probably say his or her. In the Denial of St. Peter, two people point, one with one finger, and the other, the woman, with one finger from each of her hands, which makes three fingers pointing at Peter. And that shows us and reminds us of the 3 times that Peter denied Jesus. There's detail in his pictures, and he paints himself as the soldier pointing at Peter. He had one fight where he was severely beaten and disfigured in his real-life Caravaggio. His skull was sunken in one of his eye sockets, and he painted himself as the head of Goliath when David had beheaded him here. Can you imagine passing this picture around at Club Sunday upstairs now? Children, why don't you talk as 6-year-olds about how this makes you feel about the story of David and Goliath? And also it's his head that he paints in both of his paintings in 1607 and 1609, in Salome with the head of John the Baptist. This one from 1607, you see Salome thinking, why did I actually ask for the head of the John the Baptist? And that's Caravaggio's head. And then in the next one, you see the guy that has actually beheaded him turning away in shame, as well as Salome, whilst Salome's mother looks on thinking, yeah, job well done. And in the Supper at Emmaus, which you see a copy of hanging behind me on the wall, Caravaggio shows himself as the clean-shaven waiter to the right of Jesus, always in and around Jesus. But he had a desperate state of his mind, and that captures our Bible reading today from John 11. It starts with Jesus hearing about his friend Lazarus, who is unwell, and he's encouraged by his disciples to go there and help make him better. But Jesus doesn't go. They go 2 days later, and when they arrive in Bethany, which is 2 miles outside of Jerusalem, Lazarus has already been dead and in the tomb for 4 days. Why do they tell us 4 days? Because in their culture, by 4 days, the carcass is beginning to stink. It's beyond help. You stop putting the spices on it at this stage. That person is dead. C.S. Lewis wrote a book, A Grief Observed, which I found so helpful on the death of my dad a couple of years ago when he reflects on the death of his wife. Just a couple of quotes for you. I'm thinking about her nearly always. It is hard to have patience with people who say, there is no death, or death doesn't matter. There is death, and whatever is, matters. And he says this, tonight all the hells of young grief have opened up again. The mad words, the bitter resentment, the fluttering in the stomach, the nightmare unreality, the wallowed in tears. For in grief nothing stays put. One keeps on emerging from a phase, but it always recurs round and round. Everything repeats. Am I going in circles, or do I dare hope I am on a spiral? But if a spiral, am I going up or down it? His emotions were all over the place. And I imagine that the emotions of Mary and Martha on the death of their brother Lazarus and the Jewish people that were around them at that time were all over the place. And we can see in our video clip from John chapter 11, verse 17 onwards, that Jesus hasn't got it all together emotionally either. Let's watch our reading together.
On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again, in the resurrection, at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth round his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go."
Martha comes outside the village to meet Jesus in private and chats with him and says that Jesus could have saved her brother. And Jesus looks at her in verses 25 and 26 and says, "I am the resurrection," literally standing up on my feet, rising instead of falling. and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Jesus says he is the resurrection. Not I will be the resurrection, but I am the resurrection now, and I am life. That Greek word zoe, which means a life of depth, not just going through the motions. Jesus says this in the midst of death and mourning. It's so inappropriate at one level, and yet so challenging and comforting at another. Jesus is saying to her, I embody the power to bring life where there is death, Martha. And Martha says that she believes in Jesus and then goes and gets Mary, who immediately sprints out to him, the Usain Bolt of the Bible. And she goes and the crowd follow, and Jesus sees her weeping, and then he is moved. And the shortest Bible verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. 2 words. Jesus was deeply moved. That Greek word there for moved is groaning, murmuring, indignant, a sigh. And Jesus is troubled in spirit. This is a Caravaggio scene with shades of darkness and light. And the crowd say, look how much Jesus loved Lazarus. I wonder if they said that because they'd been grumbling. Well, why hasn't Jesus turned up? It can, heal a man born blind. He didn't even know the man born blind. Why doesn't he come and actually help his mate, his friend, the person who put food on the table for him, gave him a bed to sleep in, and his disciples when he turned up at a moment's notice? Jesus has the stone rolled away from the cave. He prays for the benefit of those watching on, I think, and then calls Lazarus forth. And Lazarus comes out and they take off the grave clothes, probably because they were wrapped so tightly and they don't want him to suffocate and die again. Caravaggio captured this painting, the Raising of Lazarus, he called it, a huge painting that is 9 feet wide and 12 feet high. Elaine Wilson, in her book A Second Chance, says this: since Caravaggio did not keep a studio, he asked for workspace in the largest building available in Messina, which turned out to be the local hospital. They gladly gave the famous artist a fine suite to use as a studio. They also assigned several hospital staff members to serve as full-time servants and/or models for Caravaggio. The story lives on, true or not, that when it came to time to paint the figure of Lazarus, Caravaggio requested a dead body be brought from the hospital morgue to his studio. He directed his helpers to hold the body in a specific position while he painted it. Naturally, they complained about the offensive smell, which must have been overwhelming and nearly intolerable in the humid, confined space of the studio. In typical fashion, an aggravated Caravaggio whipped out his dagger and threateningly waved the long, sharp blade at them. Prudently, they realised the seriousness of his advances and the gravity of their assignment and quickly withdrew their complaints. They silently held the dead body while he painted. At the unveiling of the painting, several citizens of Messina, who considered themselves art critics of the highest order, appeared less than enthusiastic about what they saw. Noticing their lacklustre response, Caravaggio again pulled out his dagger and slashed the painting to ribbons while they looked on in horror. He immediately promised to paint a second one, which is the one we see here. Some critics didn't like the painting, and so he tore it apart and promised a better one. Can you believe that? Imagine me ripping apart that copy of the Caravaggio that we've got behind us. This copy of the Caravaggio behind me is one that was done by a member of this church who's a high-performing artist and does copies for museums and art places that they can put up when they're repairing the original. This painting is worth a lot of money and was given to me as a gift. It hangs in my study and is a constant reminder of the resurrected Jesus. Imagine if I now took a knife to it and sliced it to pieces. How awful would that be? Now, as we look at this painting, let's recognise that it's not biblically correct, as Lazarus hasn't walked out of the tomb in this one. They've taken out the dead body of Lazarus. I see that. But in the Bible reading, it does say the dead man came out. So he walked out, and it says that in some way he wasn't still alive. But I don't want to get my knickers in a twist about that. I just want to ask the question, can this painting shed any light on the story of the raising of Lazarus? The two sisters stand at their brother's head, waiting for him to breathe. Martha leans forward to be able to feel Lazarus's first breath. Did you ever lean over a dead loved one in a hospital or at home, and you were longing for that moment. You were kidding yourselves, hoping and praying and believing that maybe they're not really dead. Maybe there's just a long gap between their last breath and their next one. Martha hangs there, hoping that he will come back to life. Lazarus' body is intentionally stretched out in a cross shape, and his right hand reaches out towards Jesus to receive life. On the close-up of Jesus here, you can see that Jesus stands tall. Apart from the nosy neighbour right behind Jesus' head, Jesus is the tallest one in the painting, and he stands erect, tall, strong, confident. Jesus' right hand mimics God's hand on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the Creation of Adam painting by Michelangelo. You can see the painting there, and then on the next slide, both of those hands painted like that. And he used the same hand for Jesus in the calling of St. Matthew, when Jesus calls Matthew, and he points with the same picture, and you see again on the close-up of all three, 1, 2, 3, Caravaggio makes a deliberate nod to Michelangelo and says, if you're in any doubt as to whether I think Jesus is the Son of God, I've painted the hand of God so that there isn't any doubt. And in the picture, as we go back to the full picture of it, you can see that light comes beyond the canvas. Next slide, please, Andy, the one of the Raising of Lazarus. Now, if you can go back, thank you, to the Lazarus one. Brilliant. We'll go back to that, and you can see that the light comes from beyond the canvas, and that is Caravaggio's way of saying the grace of God is mysterious. You can't see always where it comes from, but it bursts into our lives. Caravaggio had a firm belief in eternal life. Elaine Wilson says, a large majority of Caravaggio's paintings centre around fear, anguish and doubt. In the Raising of Lazarus, he shifted his approach and illustrated the triumph of life over death, of light over darkness, of divine grace. He portrayed the grace in the gesture of Lazarus as the man's hand moved away from the darkness of death into the light of life. This painting and this Bible story, amidst all the grief and all the confusion, is about the victory of light over darkness. And we've had in many moments and at many angles a year that has been dark. But we, my friends, need to cling to a Jesus who triumphs over that darkness. In the painting, the man praying and looking towards the light is again Caravaggio. He puts himself in an interesting place, a place of hope and a place of faith as he's surrounded by the death of Lazarus. If this is where Caravaggio places himself in the painting, where am I in it? Who am I in the story? And forget genders here, but who am I in this story? Am I Mary? Am I Martha? Am I Lazarus? Am I like Martha, plain spoken and dismayed? I call a spoon, I don't call a spade a spoon, I call a spade a spade. I talk straight. Why didn't you come sooner, Jesus? Sometimes as Christians we can be so polite around God and we don't actually pray real prayers. We don't pray that third of the Psalms that are Psalms of lament. For crying out loud, God, where are you? How are you? Oh, I'm fine. My whole family's died. All my cats drowned. And I lost my marshmallows. They kind of exploded and become life rafts. But then the water receded and everything's fine. Yes, I'm fine. No, you're not. You're in a complete mess. Sometimes we need to be like Martha and be plain spoken. And we're allowed to be dismayed. But she does still believe in Jesus, even though she didn't know it all. Remember when Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life? And she says, yes, I know, at the end of the age, the resurrected will happen. Jesus said, no, resurrection's now with me. And she confuses it with a future time. She didn't have all the answers. Eugene Peterson, the writer of The Message, a pastor, he said, I've met plenty of Christians who know the truth. They've got all the right answers, and they will tell you every single answer in a quite cold, clinical way with no kind of love about it. He He said, then I've met Christians who live the truth. They don't know all the answers. They're not theologically sharp on everything, but you see Jesus shining through them. And Eugene Peterson's conclusion at the end of his 25 years of ministry was, I would rather be around Christians who live the truth than those who just know it. I want to be someone who knows the truth, and that floods into me living it. Am I like Mary? I'm contemplative. I don't like being around crowds. So maybe she sprints out to see Jesus because she doesn't want to get emotional around other people. But emotional she is. You know, when people come to see me, or when they used to, when we could, if they ever started crying, they would apologise. I'm sorry. One woman came to see me at my last church. As soon as she walked in my study, she said, if you make me cry, I'm going to give you what for. I didn't say one word. She sat down and she started crying. I went, you cannot blame me for that. Come on. I didn't even say anything. We don't like being emotional. I get that for some of us that's the way we're wired. But when we push those emotions down, they can come out in unhealthy ways. Mary was contemplative and emotional, and she didn't give up on Jesus. The older lady next door to us, I was getting ready to come to work one day this week, and she was by a car, and she said, Neil, can you come and undo my handbrake? My daughter's put it on the car, and it's on too stiffly, I can't do it. I said, yeah, okay. I imagined myself in a cape at this stage, and I leaned over, and I got the handbrake, and I went like that, and it would move. I could move it. I thought, oh my life, this is really embarrassing. I'm like a lady in her 80s. So then I sat down, no offence to you in the cheap seats out there. And so I sat down and I sat in the car, and then both hands, and I managed to get the handbrake off. Some of us have put the handbrake on emotionally in this last year, and I get that, but maybe we need to take that handbrake off. Maybe that is taking the handbrake off and talking to our family, or to a loved one, or to a trained counsellor, someone we feel safe with, a minister. We're opening up so that each of the ministers and the elders will offer you time to pray with them for 15 minutes every day of the week, Monday to Friday, from in May all the way through to July. I think we're going to do it, so that you can sit with us for 15 minutes and we just pray with you as a way of acknowledging this year has been blimmin' hard. Or am I like Lazarus? Wealthy, we're told, died too young, you can't take it with you. Maybe the religious, maybe we're like him and we're thinking, my life is being curtailed and that's not fair. It might not be physical death, it might be we've lost our job, or we're worried about paying our mortgage, or we're just feeling our life has been shrunken by these lockdowns. The religious leaders wanted to kill Lazarus. After they got rid of Jesus, they thought we'd get rid of Lazarus. And so Lazarus, we're told in church history, after hanging around with the disciples, then made an exit from Bethany. And wouldn't you? And he sailed to a foreign land. Some say that he went with Barnabas and Paul and was ordained as the first bishop of Kition on the island of Cyprus, which is present-day Lanana. Others say that he was the first bishop of Marseille. And others say that he could have been the first bishop of both as they planted the churches and they expanded. Whatever the truth is, when Lazarus rose from the dead, he preached the resurrected Jesus and the power of Jesus to everyone he met. Friends, if we stick our head above the parapet for Jesus, people will take a shot at it, and or the devil will take a shot at it, because we're making a statement for him. Am I willing to be like Lazarus in this way, with my life shrunken in certain ways? Will I still preach in the way I live and the words I say for him? So what is the gospel according to Caravaggio? For me, the title of Andrew Graham Dixon's biography goes some way towards it. He entitled his biography Caravaggio, A Life Sacred and Profane. It captures Caravaggio's life, a life that was broken and busted in so many ways, drenched in sin from so many angles, but also had this powerful spirituality about it that led us towards God and his Son, Jesus. And doesn't that title, A Sacred and Profane Life, capture your life and mine to a degree? Aren't there moments in your life that you are proud as punch of, and others that I'm ashamed of? And the good news is that Jesus isn't limited by this. Jesus doesn't say, oh, I'm sorry, when you can play guitar chords as well as Andy Simmons, and when you can sing as well as Bryony, and when you can tinkle the ivories, well then I'll use you. No, he says to all of us, you are welcomed and I can use you now. He won't wait for us to have everything together before Jesus' light shines through us. If God can be revealed through someone like Caravaggio, then I humbly suggest he can be revealed through somebody like you and somebody like me. The gospel according to Caravaggio, no matter who we are, Jesus calls us out of darkness and death into light and life. I think that's a good message.